Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of GDDV 100 Game Theory 1. My name is Kasanas. Guys, in the last episode, we talked a little bit about the course itself. That's what we talked about, why I'm doing this and who this course is for. In this particular episode, we're going to take a look at the idea of game and what is game. All right? Let's get started. So what exactly is game? This is what we're going to try and figure out. We're going to be working in games or studying games or you have an interest in games, right? And we all play games. We all do that. But can we define it? Can you actually define what a game is? And that's what today's episode is all about, being able to define exactly what a game is. Now, later on, if your parents ask you and they're trying to justify sending you to a school, it costs all this money to send you to school, you have to be able to justify the fact that you're actually learning something. So let's start off with being able to tell them exactly what it is you do. And we're going to start off probably in the weakest way we possibly can. We're going to start off with a dictionary definition of game. It's not strong academia, I know. But instead, we're just going to take a look at what most people accept as game, right? If you ask somebody what is a game, they'd probably look it up in the dictionary if they had to give you an actual definition. So, from the dictionary, game is a form of play or sport, especially a competitive one, played according to rules decided by skill, strength, or luck. Now, there's some interesting stuff in here. As a definition, there's some interesting stuff in here. We've got a couple of words that we can't define yet. We haven't defined what play means. We know we can play games, we can play sports, we can play instruments, we can play a role. There's a lot of things we can play, but we haven't defined what play is yet. And sport. Is there a difference between sport and game? Is there something that defines, that differentiates those two things? Now, something that's really good in here is the idea of rules. That's going to be really important as we move forward, actually. We'll talk about rules in depth throughout this particular week. So, now that we have these extra words that we can't define, let's take a look at them. Let's take a look at the definition of play and find out if there's a difference between playing and gaming. So, once again, straight back to our dictionary. Verb. Engage in activity for enjoyment and recreation rather than a serious or practical purpose. A verb. Take part in a sport or activity for enjoyment. Verb. Amuse oneself by engaging in imaginative pretense. Now, when we take a look at the definition of play from as a verb, there's a lot in here about it being not serious, about it being for amusement, for enjoyment. There's a lot in there about that. Now, we've gone back and we use the word sport in here as well, but there's a lot about play being mostly for amusement. If we take a look at the noun, activity engaged in for enjoyment and recreation, especially by children, and the noun, the conducting of an athletic match or contest. Now, again, that kind of bleeds into sports, right? Conducting of an athletic match or contest. So it kind of bleeds into sports there. And again, it's about enjoyment. It's for children, it's saying. So I don't know if that's true, right? But that's what play is all about. Play is for children. It's amusing. It's for enjoyment. And that's interesting because we can play a lot of different things. We already know we can play a lot of things. We already talked about play sports, play an instrument, play a role, play a game. There's a lot of things that we can play. So I don't know if play is extremely important when it comes to the definition of game. What is sport? So again, back to our dictionary. An activity involving physical exertion and skill in which an individual or team competes against one another or others for entertainment. Again, entertainment is in here, the idea of entertainment. And I don't know if sport is always about entertainment. If we go back in history and we take a look at the Mayans, for example, they had a sport they used to appease their gods, and then afterwards the winners were all killed. And that was probably for entertainment of the masses and entertainment of the gods, I guess. So maybe it is all about that. I don't know. But again, I don't know if game is necessarily about sport. It's not about entertainment for others, probably. I mean, there is eSports and that kind of stuff where it's taking place for others. But I don't know if engaging within a game is for the entertainment of other people. It's often for yourselves, right? It's often for the people who are doing it. So we've got a few interesting words in there. We have to really decide then, is game for play? Is it play or is it a sport? And again, breaking down those definitions, play is fun, enjoyment, not serious, recreation. It's for children. It's unstructured and free form. So the fact that this suggests it's unstructured to me immediately says that play is not game. Game is not actually play, right? Game is about rules. We have rules in games. And that's one of the things that makes a game, rules. Sport is about physical exertion or skill, and again, games can be about that. Individual or team, great, yeah. Competes against others with structured rules. So we're more towards a sport than we are towards game. But again, I don't know if either of those definitions really are what game is. Now, we run into a problem as well. If we start to take a look at things that we consider to be games, such as Overwatch or even eSports, and when we talk about the idea of playing Overwatch or playing eSports and the idea that these things are for fun, and they are, right? We play these games for fun. But there are definitely real world consequences to playing these games. This is someone's job. So if you are playing something and it's supposed to be about entertainment, it's supposed to be about fun, if you're playing a game or a sport, if you're playing a sport, and it's no longer about fun and it's now your job and you're doing it because you have to earn money to feed your family. I don't know if these definitions really fit the idea of game anymore. Or at least we shouldn't be using these words in the definition of game. I don't think they fit in there because truly a game, I consider Overwatch or eSports still to be people playing a game, right? You're still playing a game, you're just doing it for different reasons. So I'm not really sure, once we have these real world consequences, if the word play or sport can really be involved in the definition of what game is. Like I said, Overwatch does not cease to be a game, in my opinion, simply because people are playing it for cash rewards, right? So, quickly, let's take a look at the original definition. A form of play or sport, especially a competitive one, played according to rules and decided by skill, strength, or luck. This is what the dictionary definition of game was. And like I said, there's some interesting things that come out of this. The idea of competitive or competition of some type is great. That implies obstacles or a movement in a particular direction. And the idea of rules. So what I think we should do, instead of taking a look at what the generalized acceptance of these definitions are, is actually take a look at what some of the game designers that we know, that what they suggest a game is. And we'll start with Sid Meier. A game is a series of interesting decisions. And I understand that this statement has been kind of taken out of context, and there's a lot more depth to this particular statement that's being added here, and there's several articles about what was actually said in here. But if we take a look at the idea of a game as a series of interesting decisions, to me, it's a little bit too broad. This idea is a little bit too broad. Yes, there's some really good stuff in there. And again, I think it's really hard to define game. And I'm not suggesting that I know more than Sid Meier. Absolutely not suggesting this at all, guys. But when we take a look at that idea, if it's about interesting decisions, well, there's a lot of things in life that are interesting decisions. You know, you're gone to a new restaurant, and what should you choose for the menu? That's an interesting decision that you're making. You've never been here before. You're going to choose something. You know, you look around the elevator and lots of people in there. Should I fart? Is everyone going to know it's me? Again, this is an interesting decision you've got, but again, it's not, I don't think that's a game. Should I swipe left or right? Again, interesting decision, but not necessarily a game to me. But the definition or what Sid Meier suggested is the definition of game has a couple of really interesting things in it. Particularly the word decision. And the word decision, interesting decision implies a choice. You're making a choice between two things. And choice, in turn, implies directionality. You are moving towards something and you're moving away from something else. And making a choice, you are moving in a particular direction. Which means that whatever it is you're doing has several outcomes that are potentially available to you. In making a choice, there are several outcomes that are available. This, in turn, suggests conflict of some kind. So there's conflict here, something that you have to overcome, some decision you have to make, and you're moving in a particular direction. So I think that the word decision is really important within Sid Meier's statement. And again, as I say here, not all games involve meaningful choice, but all games involve goals and conflict. Good games will involve meaningful choice, and we'll get into that a little bit later on. But all games involve goals and conflict, and by suggesting it's a decision you're making, you are defining a goal, you are moving towards a particular direction, and you are overcoming a particular obstacle. You have a conflict there. Should I do this or should I do that? That's conflict, all right? And you're moving towards a particular goal. So that's awesome. If we take a look at Salin and Zimmerman and the rules of play, this is a great book. If you guys haven't purchased any type of game design reading or books at all and you're interested in it, I really recommend picking up Rules of Play, Game Design Fundamentals. So in the book, Salin and Zimmerman went through and they this is just a small portion of what's been suggested here, just so you guys know. In the book, Salin and Zimmerman went through and they took a look at several different theorists who talked about game, and they broke down the ideas into the following chart. And what they did is they went through and they looked at what each person said about game, gave it a little check, and then afterwards they went through and they said, okay, these are the sections that were common amongst all of these theorists. And in doing so, they came up with their own definition. So let's take a look at what they included in here. Proceeds according to rules that limit players, and the majority of people suggested that. So almost every single one of these theorists said yes, this is what game is. And there's a lot more to this, guys. I'm really going here high level. If you pick up that book and you read through the book, there's a lot of really interesting stuff within here. But anyway, they all said that yes, it's all about rules, and you can see that's the one that the majority of people agreed with. So anytime that 3 or more of them agreed, it got included into this chart, and into the highlighted section of the chart. So it's about a conflict or contest. Again, conflict is important. 3 people said yes. Goal-oriented, outcome-oriented. Again, 5 out of these people said yes. Great. Activity, process, or event. Involves decision-making. Artificial, safe, outside ordinary life. And voluntary. So again, there's a lot of information in this book. If you read through it, they go through and they explain what each one of these sections mean. And I think it's really important that if you're going to pick up a book, grab this one as a starting spot, grab this book and read through it. And you'll really understand what each of these sections mean. From this information, Salin and Zimmerman kind of made a composite definition of what game is. And this is exactly what they said. A game is a system in which players engage in an artificial conflict defined by rules that result in a quantifiable outcome. So that's what was suggested. And again, there's a lot of great stuff in here. They took a lot of super intelligent people's work and they made this composite and they came up with this great definition. Now, for me, it's much more refined than it was previously, but there's still some stuff for me personally that I think kind of get in my way of what I think a game is. So they start off with an idea that it's an artificial conflict, right? If we go back and look, they say it's an artificial conflict. And the way this has been explained is that games themselves are separated from real life by this boundary that they call the magic circle. And anything within the magic circle, anything within this boundary is the game, and anything outside of the magic circle is not the game. And this magic circle can be expanded to include different things. So my big problem with the idea of an artificial conflict is it's not necessarily artificial, and it's not necessarily something that doesn't affect real life, right? There can be a very real life quantifiable outcome from games that we play, especially if we take a look at like competition between during the Cold War, competition between Deep Blue and the Russian chess master, for example, had very far-reaching implications when it came to the political sphere at that time. Or if we consider Russian roulette, there's a very quantifiable outcome, and that outcome is death, and that obviously is not artificial. That's not an artificial conflict. You're pulling the trigger, you're killing yourself if you're playing this game. So there's very real world effects that can come about by games, and I definitely would consider, chess a game, and I definitely would consider Russian roulette a game. In my opinion, this is just my opinion. So for me, having this artificial conflict is again kind of an issue. And additionally, we can apply that definition to a lot of different things that I don't actually think are games. So as an example, riding a roller coaster. Riding a roller coaster based on that definition would be considered a game. The roller coaster itself is a closed system, right? It's a system, the participants come on and they are overcoming something. They're overcoming a fear of heights or they're overcoming a speed limit that they can travel at. They're overcoming a lot of different things that are available here. And this is what forms the conflict. And it is a completely artificial environment, and it's definitely defined by the rule set, this rule set being the tracks. We have to sit in the seat. We have to wear our seatbelts. We travel along the tracks. Obviously, we can cheat and undo our seatbelt and fly out. But if we're following the rules, we have to stay on the tracks, we have to stay in our cart, and we go from one place to the other. And there's a very definite quantifiable outcome of having traveled a certain distance, having traveled over a certain amount of time, having traveled a certain speed. There's a lot of different quantifiable outcomes. Now, I personally do not consider a roller coaster a game. So, and I don't consider a puzzle a game. So in the same way that I don't consider a puzzle a game or a roller coaster game, it's because you can follow the rules, but if you do so, there's only one single quantifiable outcome. And for me, I think a game has to have more than one quantifiable outcome. If there is a set outcome that if you follow the rules, if there's only one outcome, to me, it's not really a game. It's a process as opposed to a game. So there's a couple of things within Salem Zimmerman's definition that not that I don't agree with it, but that I think it for me is not quite narrow enough. And this is all a process that I went through when I was really trying to decide myself what I thought game was. I went through this process and I studied what all these people were saying, and I was working towards my own definition of what game meant, what it meant to me. So again, within Salem and Zimmerman's book, they don't consider an RPG or any kind of sandbox itself to be a game. And again, it's because it lacks a quantifiable outcome. If you've got an RPG, so you've got all the rules set for Dungeons and Dragons, that's not a game yet, right? That's not a game because there's no set goal. You have no set goal. It doesn't become a game until the dungeon master takes that rule set and then makes an outcome or makes an objective that the players are trying to come across. So looking at Dungeons and Dragons is not a game until after we add a module of some kind that has a defined goal. And if it doesn't have a defined goal, if your party is just doing stuff and you haven't made up your own objective, I mean, because you can define your own objectives and you can then therefore make it into a game, then an RPG itself, as far as Salem and Zimmerman are concerned, is not actually a game itself. An individual session that occurs where there's no completed outcome is not a game itself. Okay? So there's some interesting stuff that came out of that definition and some stuff that ultimately I thought was important to look at for my own personal definition. So they suggest that a game is a system, that it's that's a system that's defined by this magic circle, as I've talked about a little bit, that there's conflict involved, that it's defined by rules, and that there's a quantifiable outcome. A game is a system. It's really interesting to me, and in fact, we're going to take a look more at system design, because basically, in my opinion, game design is system design, all right? But we're going to take a look at that in a future video. So once I had all of this, I thought to myself, like, well, what's my personal opinion? What is my personal definition of game? And that's really what I wanted to do. I wanted to come up with my own definition of what I thought game was. And ultimately, I came up with this idea. A game is a system designed with the intent to thrill, in which players, bound by rules, overcome obstacles to achieve a specific result to a stated objective with variable possible outcomes. And this is not something, guys, that I think you should write down and memorize. Again, this was my own mindset. This was my own mind moving towards what I thought game was. And that's what I came up with. And there's some stuff in here that I think we're going to talk about much more in depth. Game as a system, we're going to talk about in depth. Systems require a purpose. So for me, a game has an intent to thrill, right? And I use the word thrill very specifically. It's not entertainment necessarily. It's not for fun. I'm not using the word fun in there. I use the word thrill. It's going to cause this moment of excitement, right? Even Russian roulette is going to cause a moment of excitement for everybody around the table as that person pulls the trigger, right? It's going to be it might not be the thrill of everyone's lifetime, but it's going to cause this stir within them. And again, it's about rules. It has to be bound by rules. So there has to be rules involved. As soon as there's no rules involved, then we've moved from the idea of game into the idea of play, right? Where play is unstructured, a game itself has structure to it. And I think it's important that obstacles are included. The idea of conflict is included. It doesn't have to be conflict with another player. It can be conflict, self-conflict, or something that you're trying to overcome yourself. If you're playing an individual game, that's perfectly fine. But there's some type of obstacle that's preventing you from actually reaching your stated goal. And as soon as you have that, you have a stated goal, you're trying to get there, and you have this obstacle that's blocking you, and overcoming that obstacle or those obstacles to allow you to get to that particular goal is going to create a number of different outcomes. You may beat the obstacle, or you may fail. You may fail. If you do, then there's several different outcomes there, right? It's not something that's definitely going to happen. It's not like an eventuality. Something is going to happen one way or the other, yes, but there's not an eventuality that you will reach this final goal, right? There's things that are standing in your way, and there's several different outcomes that are available to you. So that's my definition of what game is. Now, I struggled with this for a really long time. Like I said, I went through and I researched a lot about what the idea of game really meant. And Ultimately, I don't know if it's important. After all of what I've just said to you, I honestly don't know if defining game is truly important. Having an understanding of what it is, yes. But I think as soon as we start to say this is game and this is not game, we are moving towards blocking creativity. We are ruining opportunities. We're limiting opportunities that may create something wonderful. So as soon as we start to get into this real academic argument about what exactly is a game, uh, we might be cutting off something wonderful, and that's not what we want to do as creators, as designers. We want to explore all of this, right? We don't want to limit creativity. We want to make sure that we've explored everything and allow our particular medium to move forward, right? We want to advance it. As academics within game, we want to advance these ideas. All right. So I don't know if it's ultimately important. Calling it an interactive experience, calling it a game. I don't know if it really matters that we have clear definitions of what each of these things are. I know, guys. I took you a long way just to tell you that half of what I said doesn't mean anything. And that's not what I'm trying to say. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to suggest that you keep an open mind of exactly what it is, that what it is you're doing. An interactive experience is not any less important, or having when we have this discussion about what is a casual gamer and what is a hardcore gamer, I don't know if it's important academically to really define these things. As soon as we do, and we start to limit experience of people, we start to limit our own medium, we start to limit the edges of what we can do. And I think it's really important that you, as students, people who are studying game, I think it's really important that you don't close off any of these experiences. Right? I think it's really important that yes, you have to understand your audience, and yes, you have to understand who your games are for, but labeling them, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's important at all. Let's maybe consider dropping those labels, guys. Anyway, I really hope you enjoyed that. That brings us to the end of this episode. That brings us to the end of this particular discussion. We're going to go on and talk about things like systems and rules as we move forward, just so we've got all these definitions, all these things kind of in place. So I hope you're enjoying this. I'm hoping you guys are enjoying this particular series. Again, if you are, let me know down below with a thumbs up. And if you're not, a thumbs down is perfectly fine. These videos are really for my students. This is the academic theory that my students will be studying. We're going to be taking this academic theory. They'll be studying on their own asynchronously. And then afterwards, we'll be moving into the classroom and we'll be doing synchronous studies, synchronous discussions where we really dive deep into these ideas. Okay, everyone. Thumbs up. Thumbs down, comments down below, and if you haven't done so, please take a few seconds to subscribe. Have yourselves a wonderful day, everyone.